You prepare yourself for a lot when you wear the uniform. Distance. Silence. Missed birthdays. The weight of knowing the world keeps moving while you stand watch somewhere far from home. I thought I understood all of that. I thought I was ready. What I wasn't ready for was a phone call that made everything go quiet. It was a normal afternoon on base. Nothing dramatic. The low hum of generators, boots scraping concrete, men laughing over nothing important. I was halfway through my meal when my phone buzzed. A name I recognized instantly, my neighbor back in Texas. A man who never exaggerated. Never panicked. The moment I heard his voice, I knew something was wrong. "Sir, I don't want to alarm you," he said, pausing like he was choosing every word carefully. "But there are people living in your house." I remember staring at the wall in front of me, waiting for the rest of the sentence. Waiting for the joke. It didn't come. I asked him to repeat it. Slowly. Like maybe I'd misunderstood. Like maybe the distance had distorted the words. "They moved in last week," he said. "Kids. Cars. Lights on at night. And they changed the locks." Everything else disappeared. The noise. The room. The world. It felt like someone had quietly reached into my life and shifted it sideways, just enough that nothing made sense anymore. I hadn't missed a payment. I hadn't abandoned my home. I was serving my country, and somehow, while I was gone, my house had stopped being mine. That was the moment I realized something dangerous had happened. And whatever was waiting for me back home, it wasn't a misunderstanding. Before we continue, drop your city or country in the comments. I want to see how far this reaches. And if you believe dignity matters more than authority, like the video and subscribe. This channel stands for truth. I'm not the kind of man who talks much about service. Not because it didn't matter, but because the people who lived it usually don't feel the need to announce it. You do your job. You come home when you can. And you try to build something solid in the quiet spaces in between. Before deployment, that's what my life looked like. Simple. Grounded. I worked with my hands when I wasn't in uniform. Saved carefully. Bought a modest home outside town, nothing flashy, just a place with good bones, a deep porch, and a stretch of land that felt like it could breathe. I chose that neighborhood because it was quiet. Because it felt like somewhere you could grow old without being watched. The house wasn't just mine. It carried history. My father helped me lay the fence line one summer, sweat dripping, jokes flying, both of us pretending the work was harder than it was just to stretch the time together. My mother set me a clock that still ticked louder than it should, its steady rhythm filling the rooms at night. Every board, every nail, felt earned. That's when the HOA entered the picture. Westfield Meadow Homeowners Association. Official letters. Polite language. Rules printed in clean fonts. At first, it was harmless. Notes about lawn height. Reminders about trash bins. The usual small-town control wrapped in smiles. And at the center of it all was the president, Karen. Middle-aged. Immaculate hair. Always holding a clipboard like it was a badge. She had a way of speaking that sounded reasonable right up until you realized she was never actually asking. She was informing. Deciding. Managing people's lives under the banner of community standards. I kept my head down. Paid my dues. Followed the rules. I wasn't home enough to care about mailbox colors or fence shades. When you've stood in places where rules are survival, petty authority loses its power. Before I left for deployment, I did everything by the book. Notified the HOA. Arranged lawn maintenance. Installed cameras. Locked my home with the kind of care you give something you plan to return to. I believed distance was the only thing I had to worry about. I didn't know that while I was gone, someone else was watching my house, not to protect it, but to claim it. After that call, the truth didn't come all at once. It leaked in slowly, piece by piece, like water seeping through a crack you didn't know was there until the damage had already spread. My neighbor stayed on the line with me longer than he probably should have. He lowered his voice, like he was afraid the walls might hear him even from halfway across the world. He told me he'd noticed unfamiliar cars in my driveway a few weeks earlier. At first, he assumed I'd rented the place out. A lot of folks did that when they were gone. It made sense. Then the cars stayed. Then came the kids. Bright plastic toys scattered across my yard like the place had always belonged to someone else. The porch light, the one I always left off, glowing late into the night. Curtains drawn in rooms I knew by heart. And then, the locks. I went over to check, he said. Just to make sure everything was all right. That's when I saw it. New deadbolts. Different keys. That was when my chest tightened. Because locks don't change themselves. Someone had made a decision. Someone had crossed a line and called it normal. He told me he'd reached out to the HOA, thinking maybe there'd been some mistake. Maybe they'd had a break-in report. Maybe they were holding the house for safety. That was when the explanation came out, clean and confident, like it had already been rehearsed. They declared my home unattended property. Not abandoned. Not vacant. Unattended. According to them, the house had been sitting unused for too long, and in the best interest of the community, it had been placed into a temporary housing program. They said it was about safety. About maintaining property values. About responsibility. They never said my name. They never mentioned my service. And they certainly never tried to contact me. I asked the question that should have stopped everything right there. Did they show any proof? Any notice? Anything with my signature on it? My neighbor hesitated. They said the board approved it. The board. That faceless shield people hide behind when they don't want to take responsibility. Then came the detail that made it all click into place. The family living there wasn't random. They were connected. A relative of the HOA president. Someone Karen trusted. Someone who wouldn't ask too many questions if the paperwork looked official enough. It wasn't a break-in. It wasn't desperation. It was theft wrapped in bureaucracy. I tried calling the sheriff's office immediately. My hands were steady, but my thoughts weren't. I explained everything, my deployment, the locks, the tenants, the HOA's explanation. The deputy on the line listened patiently, and when he spoke, his voice carried the kind of calm that comes from saying the same hard thing too many times. "Sir, I understand how upsetting this is," he said. "But you'll need to be physically present to file. We can't evict occupants on your behalf over the phone." It was reasonable. It was lawful. And in that moment, it was completely useless. When the call ended, I sat there staring at nothing, realizing the violation hadn't just happened to my house. It had happened to my absence. Someone had decided that because I wasn't there to object, my life was negotiable. After that, there was nothing left to do but wait. And waiting, I learned, can be its own kind of punishment. I went back to my duties like nothing had changed. The uniform still fit. The routine still held. Orders were given, orders were followed. On the surface, I was exactly who I'd been the day before. But inside, something had shifted. A slow, grinding pressure that never quite released. Anger didn't arrive the way people expect it to. There was no explosion. No shouting into the phone. No reckless thoughts. It came quietly, settling deep in my chest like a weight I couldn't set down. The kind of anger that doesn't burn hot, but cold. Focused. Patient. At night, when the base finally went still and the sky stretched wide and empty, my mind went back home. I pictured strangers walking through my rooms, touching the walls I'd painted, sitting on furniture that carried my family's shape. I imagined them sleeping in my bed, their lives unfolding inside a space that still held my name on the deed. I thought about Karen. About that careful smile. About how easy it must have been to look at my absence and call it opportunity. to convince herself she was doing something for the community while handing my house to someone she trusted. What made it worse wasn't just the theft. It was the helplessness. I was trained to handle conflict, trained to assess threats and respond with clarity. But this wasn't a battlefield. There was no immediate action to take, no enemy to face, just a rulebook designed to protect the very people misusing it. I spoke to the sheriff again a few days later. Different voice, same answer. Be patient. Come home. We'll handle it then. So I swallowed it. Every morning, I folded the anger the same way I folded my uniform, tight, precise, out of sight. Discipline teaches you how to function when emotions threaten to interfere. It teaches you how to keep moving even when something essential has been taken from you. But discipline doesn't erase injustice. It only delays the moment you're forced to confront it. As weeks passed, the anger sharpened. Not louder, clearer. I stopped asking how this could happen and started asking who thought I wouldn't fight it. Who saw my silence as surrender? Who assumed distance meant weakness? By the time my deployment ended, I wasn't carrying rage. I was carrying resolve. Whatever waited for me back home, I knew one thing for certain: I wasn't returning to ask permission. I was returning to reclaim what had always been mine. When the plane finally touched down, there were no banners waiting for me. No surprises. No speeches. Just the quiet weight of being back on American soil and the understanding that home wasn't going to greet me the way it used to. I didn't drive straight to my house. I stopped first to pick up 3 men I trusted without question. Brothers, not by blood, but by shared time and places where trust isn't optional. I didn't explain much over the phone. I didn't need to. When I told them what had happened, there was a pause on the line, not disbelief, but recognition. The kind that says, yeah, that tracks. They showed up anyway. We drove toward my property before sunrise, the sky still holding onto that deep blue silence just before the world wakes up. The road was familiar. Every turn still lived in my muscle memory. And for a moment, I almost let myself believe things would look the same. Then my house came into view. It was still standing. Still solid. Same roofline. Same fence my father and I had built. But something about it felt off immediately, like seeing a loved one across a crowded room and realizing they're wearing someone else's clothes. The porch light was on. It had always been off when I was gone. Curtains were pulled tight against windows that used to welcome the morning. A car sat in my driveway, parked like it belonged there. Toys were scattered across my yard, bright plastic, careless and loud against the quiet land. A tricycle leaned against my fence, its small wheel spinning slowly in the morning breeze. I parked and stepped out slowly, my boots sinking into dirt that should have felt grounding. Instead, it felt foreign. Like the land itself was asking me who I was supposed to be now. Smoke drifted lazily from the chimney. Someone was making breakfast in my kitchen. That's when it hit me, not anger yet, but something deeper. A sense of displacement. Of being erased while still alive. We stood there for a moment, all of us silent. No one cracked a joke. No one rushed ahead. This wasn't a charge. It was a reckoning. As I walked up the driveway, my eyes caught on details that hurt more than they should have. A hammock tied between my pecan trees, stretched like those trees had always belonged to someone else. New potted plants by the steps, flowers I didn't choose, placed where my mother used to sit when she visited. The door was closed. My door. The one that used to stick unless you lifted it just right. I climbed the porch steps, each creak still exactly where I remembered it. Muscle memory doesn't forget betrayal. I raised my hand and knocked, not hard, not soft. Just enough. Footsteps inside. A pause. The door opened. A man stood there, half awake, hair uncombed, irritation already forming on his face like I'd interrupted something important. And then I saw it, the flannel shirt he was wearing. Mine. I didn't say anything at first. I just looked past him, into my living room. My couch pushed against a different wall. My photos gone. The place rearranged in a way that stripped it of its memory. The man frowned. Yeah, he said, like I was the inconvenience. I met his eyes calmly. I'm the owner, I said. And in that moment, I knew this wasn't going to be a misunderstanding. This was going to be a confrontation. I stepped inside without waiting for permission. Not aggressive. Not threatening. Just walking into the space that carried my life, my history, my memories. The air smelled faintly of someone else's breakfast, something sugary, unnatural, like it was trying to erase the aroma of my own home. Mark, I would learn his name later, stood stiff, arms crossed, like posture could make the room his own. His hair was still messy from sleep, but his expression was rehearsed, confident, practiced. Yeah, the HOA said it was vacant, he said. His words were casual, but I felt every syllable scrape against my patience. We signed a lease. Everything's legal. I studied him quietly. My anger was not loud, it didn't need to be. It was quiet, sharp, precise, like steel cooled and polished, waiting for purpose. I'm not here to argue, I said, calm, even. I'm here to tell you the truth. This isn't yours. His face flickered between annoyance and disbelief. The board approved it. Karen Mendes, she said it was fine. You're mad at the wrong people. Ah, Karen. The queen of newsletters. The self-declared arbiter of property values. Always polite. Always correct. Always wrong when it mattered. I let him talk, because letting him speak made it easier to see through the smoke. Every excuse he had, every rehearsed line, was built on someone else's false authority. Someone who thought rules and forms were more important than respect. I walked further into the living room. The couch was pushed into the corner, the photos I'd grown up with replaced with cheap frames. My father's rifle case was shoved behind the entertainment stand. The flag from my unit, folded carelessly, sat on a shelf like a souvenir. Every object had been displaced, every memory rearranged to fit someone else's convenience. Look, I said, keeping my tone even, almost conversational. I understand that you didn't make the decision. You believed it was legal. But it's not. And you need to leave. He chuckled nervously. I mean, I have a lease, what am I supposed to do? Just pack up because you say so? I nodded once, slowly. Yes. Because I own this home. You are living here based on lies you were told. You are not the villain. But you are living in someone else's life. And it stops now. For the first time, I saw uncertainty creep into his eyes. The rehearsed confidence started to falter. The bravado he carried like armor was denting under the weight of truth. I signaled to my friends, my brothers. They hadn't spoken. They didn't need to. Their presence alone added gravity to the room. They were steady, like statues, like men who had faced things far worse than a trespassing tenant. That calm authority spoke louder than my words. Mark hesitated. He swallowed. I just. You don't have to explain, I said. You need to pack. Karen and her board gave you false authority. That ends here. You're not in trouble personally, but this isn't your home. Understand? He nodded, finally. Not relief. Not victory. Just recognition. The kind that comes when someone sees the truth and realizes the easy life they counted on is gone. I left him to gather his things. I didn't rush him. I didn't yell. I didn't gloat. Quiet dignity has a weight all its own. And in that moment, it was heavier than any force, stronger than any threat, and sharper than any argument. Because what had been stolen from me wasn't just a house. It was respect. Authority. Memory. And in this room, with three men who knew what it meant to fight for what's yours, we were taking it back, one quiet step at a time. I had barely finished walking through the living room when the familiar gravel crunch of tires reached my ears. The black SUV rolled up the driveway with that steady, deliberate hum that only a sheriff's vehicle carries. Out stepped Reeves Daniels, the man I'd come to respect for his fairness, his calm, his ability to see truth before paperwork. His eyes scanned the scene immediately, the toys scattered in the yard, the awkward tension in the air, Mark standing in my living room like he owned the place. Then they landed on me. Recognition flashed, subtle but unmistakable. "Eli," he said, voice low but firm, "didn't expect to see you back this soon." I nodded, keeping my face neutral. I didn't expect to need to either. Reeves stepped inside, eyes trained on Mark. "Sir," he said, tone professional now, "do you have proof of occupancy? ID, lease agreement, anything to show your claim?" Mark handed him a thick packet, his hands a little too eager, as though the weight of the papers could carry the truth with it. Reeves flipped through the document slowly, methodically, his eyebrows rising in that quiet way a man does when the nonsense he's reviewing defies logic. The room felt heavy. Silence pressed against the walls. Mark fidgeted, trying to fill it with nervous words, but Reeves's glance shut them down before they could escape fully. Finally, Reeves closed the folder and exhaled through his nose. "This isn't valid," he said flatly. Mark blinked, confusion and panic beginning to creep over him. "What do you mean it's not valid?" "The board signed it. Everything is legal." Reeves's voice hardened, but still calm. "I know what the board said. I also know what they've been under investigation for: forgery, fraud, misuse of authority. You are not the criminal here, sir, but you were misled. This property belongs to the rightful owner. You need to pack your things." I watched as the confidence drained from Mark's face. The rehearsed arrogance, the smugness he carried like armor, began to crumble. For the first time, he looked small, not in body, but in the realization that reality doesn't bend to lies and paperwork. My friend spread across the room quietly, reclaiming space inch by inch without a word. I felt a strange mixture of relief and vindication, but it wasn't joy. Not yet. It was simply the acknowledgement of justice arriving at the right time, through the right authority, on the right terms. Outside, the world waited, neighbors, community, the weight of the HOA's arrogance looming in their absence. Inside, we stood quietly, letting the truth settle like dust in sunlight, knowing that the pause wasn't hesitation. It was the moment when power began to shift, when the consequences of arrogance met the unyielding wall of law and order. And in that quiet tension, I realized, the fight had only just begun, but for the first time, it was about more than anger. It was about principle. About respect. About reclaiming what had always been mine. Once the immediate confrontation ended and Mark began gathering his things in stunned silence, the larger picture started to emerge. Reeves stayed with me, walking through the house, listening as I recounted everything my neighbor had told me during deployment, the weeks of waiting, the growing dread, the helpless frustration. "They've been doing this for a while," Reeves said, voice low. "Your house isn't the first." I froze. Not in shock, exactly, but in that quiet, cold recognition that what had seemed like a personal violation was actually part of something bigger. Something systematic. Karen Mendes, the HOA president, had been quietly running what Reeves described as a network of convenience disguised as community service. Emergency housing programs, temporary occupancy initiatives, property deemed unattended, all legal sounding, all carefully documented. And all of it funneled into her pocket or into the hands of those she trusted. Forgery, falsified board approvals, altered county filings, Reeves continued. They created the appearance of legitimacy. People signed off on things that never actually existed. And money, well, the money follows the paperwork. And they made sure it did. I could feel it all at once, anger, disbelief, the weight of the months spent holding in what I now understood was righteous fury. These weren't small mistakes. This was a deliberate abuse of power, dressed up in newsletters and polite memos, designed to make a few people comfortable at the expense of everyone else's property and trust. Mark had been a pawn. Not evil, just convenient. Misled into believing he was in the right because Karen's system made authority seem real. I thought about the kids playing in my yard during my absence, the furniture rearranged, the flag folded carelessly. He didn't know the harm he was causing. He didn't understand the violation. And the records? I asked. County already digging, Reeves said. They're tracing signatures, bank accounts, transfers. Every meeting, every decision that touched someone else's home, it's all coming to light. Karen and her board are in deep. Warrant level deep. I let the weight of it settle. Months of quiet anger had finally met clarity. What had been personal was now systemic. The stakes were higher. Justice wouldn't just be a lock clicking back on my front door. It would be exposure. Accountability. Transparency. Reeves placed a hand on my shoulder. You didn't imagine it. You were right to trust your instincts. They've been manipulating people under the guise of community service. And now, the law is catching up. I nodded slowly. Relief crept in, but it was tempered by something heavier, the understanding that this could have gone differently. That someone without support, without friends who'd fought beside me, without the right authority watching, could have lost everything. Permanently. For the first time, the anger that had been simmering, quiet and patient, turned into something else. Focused resolve. Not just to reclaim what was mine, but to ensure that Karen's little kingdom of power, built on manipulation and lies, crumbled completely. Because this wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about Mark. It was about principle. About exposing a system that used authority as a weapon and pretending it was service. And that's when I realized the fight wasn't over. It had only just reached the stage where truth, law, and community would finally confront it. The weeks after Mark was removed from my home were surreal. News spread faster than I could process. Neighbors whispered at mailboxes. People slowed their cars past my driveway, curiosity burning in their eyes. The quiet suburban world that Karen had carefully controlled for years was beginning to notice cracks. Then came the day the warrants were served. I wasn't in town, I didn't need to be. I watched from a distance as cameras rolled and reporters crowded the parking lot. The black SUVs, the uniformed deputies, the murmurs of the crowd, it all felt cinematic, but somehow more satisfying because it was real. Karen stepped out of the HOA office like she always did, spine straight, heels clicking confidently against the concrete. Only this time, her armor didn't fit. The confident smile faltered under the gaze of the law, under the judgment of her community, under the scrutiny she had never expected. She was used to control. She was used to being untouchable. Now, every step toward the deputies was measured, hesitant, as though she had realized for the first time she wasn't running the show anymore. One by one, board members followed, trying to maintain dignity that had long since evaporated. The newsletters, the memos, the polite notes about mailbox colors and lawn heights, they had all been mechanisms of control, of quiet intimidation. Now, they meant nothing. Paper could not stand against the law, against truth, against exposure. The reporters asked questions. The neighbors watched. Karen tried, of course. Tried to explain herself. Miscommunication. Misunderstanding. Good intentions gone wrong. But the words were meaningless. Intentions don't forge documents. Intentions don't authorize false leases. Intentions don't line your pockets with what isn't yours. The handcuffs clicked. Cameras flashed. The reality of consequences settled over her like a heavy weight she could not lift. For years, she had lectured, judged, and controlled, and now the world was finally watching her tumble. The same people who had tolerated her petty authority were now witnessing the collapse of it all. I felt none of the gloating you might expect. Watching Karen and her board led away, hearing the whispers of neighbors, seeing the evidence of long-buried fraud exposed, it wasn't vindication I felt. It was relief. Relief that justice had a voice, and that the quiet abuse of power had been confronted in the light. Reeves stood nearby, his jaw tight, hat low, silent as always, letting the process speak for itself. I understood then that this moment wasn't about me. It wasn't about Mark, or the furniture, or the flags. It was about principle, about the audacity of power being held accountable, about a community realizing the difference between authority and responsibility. And as the last deputy guided Karen into the SUV, her little kingdom of false control reduced to handcuffs and headlines, I finally felt it, the weight of injustice lifted. Quietly, firmly, like the click of a lock returning to the door it belongs to. The fight had been long. The cost had been real. But truth had prevailed, and with it, so had justice. When the last box was carried out and the last SUV rolled away, the house finally felt like mine again. Not because the walls had changed, or the furniture had returned exactly where it belonged, but because the weight of intrusion, of false authority, had lifted. My friends and I moved carefully through each room, resetting what had been displaced. Pictures returned to their places. The rifle case was dusted and stood proud once more. The flag from my unit was folded properly and placed where it belonged, catching the breeze with quiet dignity. We didn't rush. We didn't celebrate loudly. It was a slow reclaiming, each step, each adjustment, a reminder that what had been taken could be returned. Locks were checked, cameras installed, boundaries reinforced, not out of fear, but out of respect for the peace that had been hard-won. That evening, I sat on the porch, the sun melting into that long Texas stretch of orange and gold. The silence wasn't empty. It was earned. The quiet hum of life around me, the breeze through the pecan trees, the distant call of birds, the creak of the floor beneath my feet, was proof. Proof that no paper, no false authority, no misuse of power could permanently take away what truly belongs to you. Justice had arrived, measured, and deliberate. And I finally understood that home isn't just a place. It's respect. It's memory. It's the knowledge that no one can claim it if you refuse to let them. For the first time in months, I exhaled fully. This was mine. All of it. And now, finally, I could rest. Even after the doors were locked and the last box returned, the story didn't end with me. What happened wasn't just about a house. It was about how easily power can be misused, how quietly rules can become weapons, and how often good people stay silent while authority bends reality to its will. I think about the families who didn't have the resources, the support, or the awareness to fight back. How many homes have been quietly handed over under the guise of community programs? How many lives disrupted while the world looked the other way? This experience taught me that vigilance is as important as courage, and that justice sometimes arrives not with noise, but with patience, presence, and principle. My home was restored, but the lessons extend far beyond these walls. And that's why I want to hear from you. What would you do if someone tried to erase your life while you were gone?